Welcome to Formation, Faith, and Culture, a theological conversation. Once again, I'm your host, Tyler Medley. I thank you for tuning in. This is episode 3. And today, we've been talking a lot about calling and development and just what that looks like, even in episode 1, talking about formation versus information. But today, we're going to zone out a little bit, just completely zoom out and take a look at actually what's going on, because this isn't about just individual calling, it's about what's happening in the church right now. So, with that being said, I want to introduce our guest today. I have the president of Trinity Bible College and Graduate School, Dr. Paul Alexander. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Paul.
Thanks, Tyler.
How are you feeling today? You doing well?
Doing okay.
Good.
Good to be with you.
I'm so glad you're here. How long have you been the president of Trinity?
We are just completing our 14th year.
Wow.
That's a very, when you consider that the average tenure of college presidents in the United States now is round about 5.5 years. In Christian institutions, it's not a whole lot better. And in many cases, the casualty rate in Christian institutions is higher because of the financial strain that often comes with it. So we're just very grateful. I'm grateful that we're completing 14 years and still a little way to go.
Wow. So, and you've been at other places besides Trinity. How long have you been in higher education or just in ministry in general?
So this year, I am celebrating, along with Carol, my wife, our 50th year of ministry.
That's incredible.
So that will coincide with our marriage, which is also 50 years. We got married. We took a few days out on honeymoon in North Wales, and then we found our way all the way up to the northeast of Scotland, started immediately with ministry in a church there, across to Ireland, several churches. We were just young people, radical kind of faith. And eventually that trip took us to 22 nations around the world over the next 2 years. Remarkable stories, journals full of God's goodness. My dad was actually a CPA, and he didn't understand the faith deal whatsoever. And of course, in most days, it was all letters.
Yeah.
And I said, "So, Dad, we're going to do this, we're going to do that." And he'd say, "Oh, that sounds good." He said, "Who's going to pay?" And of course, I used the cliches. I said, "We're just trusting God, the Lord's." He said, "Well, yeah, well, you can trust God, but who's God going to use to pay?" And uh, in the end, it was quite radical in the way in which our journey impacted even my dad as a CPA. But
Yeah.
that's looking back a long time. We've now served on 4 continents. We've served in pastoral ministry. We've served in higher education. We've served in mission as well. So it's been a amazing, diverse, thrilling 50 years.
Wow. That's such a story of God's faithfulness and long-standing service. That's just thank you. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. So, I let's just reflect on that 50 years for a minute. Can you tell me of a time when leadership felt heavy or even overwhelming? Like, when did that leadership just feel, "Oh, this is so much. It's a lot to carry."
Yeah, I think those seasons are inevitable and they come seasonally and probably perpetually. I think there are different sources of burden. So if I were to go down a list from my own head, I think the first one is perhaps even the theology of leadership. What do we see leadership as? I think if we understand that we are co-shepherds, we're under shepherds, that there's an overwhelming privilege to influence people into a better future with God's help. I think if you can adjust yourself to that rather than to just a strategy or fulfilling a vision or getting a budget right, I think that's the first way to alleviate some of the pressure. We are co-workers.
Right. Yeah.
We're under the hand of God. We are never owners. We are only stewards. I think if you can get that theology right,
Yeah, absolutely.
it lifts the burden of leadership. Then, then I think there are the inevitable burdens that even if you get the theology right, and you've got to work on that theology all of the time, you never quite land at that place when you realize it's all God, it's all God's work, but it's important that you try and do that. Then I think that there are sort of you can graduate the kind of tensions that leadership bring, and the burden of leadership. I would say right at the top of that list is people.
Yeah.
I've often said,
Yeah.
leadership would be wonderful if it wasn't for people, but you don't lead if you don't lead people. You don't lead buildings. You don't lead programs. Uh, People are the first and most vital element of leadership, and because of that, they bring both the greatest joy and the greatest burden in leadership. I wish many, many years ago that concept of the stewardship of God's work had settled more. I would have taken things less personally, um, because you're not going to please all of the people all of the time.
Yeah.
It's just not
So
possible.
true. Yep.
Um, I think the worst is when there is overt disloyalty. And the reality is that no matter how much of a Christian organization you're in, just lurking beneath the surface is the bad reaction to a decision or a choice that you make.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then sadly, people respond. And when they respond, I don't mind an honest conversation. I don't mind strong disagreement. But when there's overt disloyalty and dishonesty,
Right.
I think that's one of the biggest burdens of leadership that people have. I empathize with leaders who face that. The deal is it's inescapable in leadership because we deal
Yeah.
with
I
people.
mean, people are always going to be people because we live in a fallen world. But I mean, betrayal, walking through that sense of like even people stirring up, you know, one side or the other or pitting people against each other. That's got to be very stressful.
It's
Yeah.
both burdensome and painful because I said once I could probably put together a seminar that nobody would attend, and the seminar would be why we always fail at HR. And I think we will always fail in Christian organizations in HR because we are people of grace, we're people of mercy, we are people of the second chance. If we don't believe that, we don't have a future personally.
Right.
And so we I find even after all these years, I still don't have difficulty trusting, hoping, believing, and then you still get disappointed when people fail. So if people want to know what's the burden of leadership, with all the joys that come, the burden is we are dealing with people, and people can be unkind, people can be uh, incredibly unfaithful, even the most Christ following of people you could get. So I would put that right at the top of the list. So the first response I'd have to leadership is you got to get a theology of leadership. And to me, the only viable theology is Jesus' leadership, which means we own nothing, we are stewards, we are passing through. At the end of the day, we are but unworthy servants. And there's just no room for arrogance or pride or self-assertion in that. The second one is it's hard to toughen up, but come to the realization that this side of heaven stuff happens.
Yes.
I think the third one is that leadership, it's inescapable that you have to talk about resources.
Yes.
And that's a burden of leadership that people who are not in leadership seldom understand.
Because that's always an unpleasant conversation.
Well, it can be a wonderful conversation because it's a faith conversation, but leaders have to carry the burden of faith,
Yes.
and part of that burden is that we will never have enough resources to do what we want to do. We're always going to have to find levels of dependence upon God, and so much of that is intangible. So I've had this issue throughout my whole leadership. People have said, so what's the strategic plan? And I am old enough now, and I think have enough leadership success to say I am a strategic planning skeptic, simply because I will never ever have a strategic budget. I'll never have a strategic income. So you guarantee me a strategic income, I can give you a strategic plan.
Yeah.
Give me $10 to spend, I can spend that really wisely.
Right. Yeah.
But I sometimes don't know where the $10 coming from. And that will either cause just a serious lack of progress, uh, bunkering down, a passing blame, uh, or even real personal disappointment and bailing out, or you knuckle down, you believe God, you push through, and sometimes, and I've got literally hundreds of stories, the answer comes at 5 minutes to midnight. That's going to be one of my big conversations when I get to heaven, is why it was always in it. But it is the burden that the leader uniquely has to carry.
Right.
So if you talk to me about the big blocks of leadership, theology is one, the reality of people is two, and the responsibility of resources is three.
Yes. Okay. That's really good. So let's zoom out some more, because let's talk about the church. Big body, or just let's have that concept. What do you would say is happening in the church right now? That's like what's actually happening with through your lens as president of the institution, this longevity and leadership. What's happening in the church right now?
I just don't think that it's a single picture. I don't think it's possible to define it in simple terms. It is just God's work on the planet, and it's incredibly diverse. So there are wonderfully good news stories emerging. Um, Most of those are in the global south. There are remarkable stories, for example, even coming out of Iran. Um, God is at work, and God will always be at work. So if I understand the Bible, he is the Lord of the church, and he is building his church.
Absolutely.
I do think, though, that the church in the West is at a sort of confliction point. Um, we have become very good at what we do. We've written all the books that need to be
Yeah.
written.
Yeah.
We have the massive luxury of formal educational process, of which I'm a great champion. Um, and yet we are really struggling to fully understand our context, to adjust to our context. And so my view of the church as we in the West would primarily engage it is that we've got some real hard homework to do in terms of what we understand the church to be. There will always be mega churches, and that's a wonderful thing. But mega churches can be the soft target of the enemy,
Right.
because you can be an anonymous Christian in a mega church.
Yeah.
I remember when Bill Hybels' church in Chicagoland paid a lot of money for an external research company to look at what was going on, and 20,000 people on a Sunday, and yet the research showed a very small percentage. We're talking about 5%, if I remember the data correctly, really had a deep understanding of what it meant to be a totally committed follower of Jesus, which was in their mission statement.
Wow.
So I think deep devotion to Jesus, follow Jesus at any cost, commitment is where we are probably lacking in the church in the West.
So we have is it's an identity crisis of saying we're seeker friendly, and inside that seeker friendly nature, are we finding that people are able to just slip through the cracks and be attendees?
I think it's more complex than that. I think our culture has mutated over the years, especially post Second World War and Korean War and Vietnam War, perhaps even more the Vietnam War than the Second World War,
Yeah.
where we spawned a generation of people who were tired of conflict, tired of militaristic kind of leadership, And so the natural human, without Jesus, the natural human response is take care of me, hug a tree, make love, not war. And so I'm only just about old enough to sort of remember the hippie um, movement where people just sort of opted out of life, opted out of responsibilities.
Yeah.
And that has mutated over the last 60 years to the point where our culture needs a lot of care, a lot of uh, empathy. And so it's very easy to turn Jesus into a feel-good commodity.
Right. Yeah.
And that is our message. Our message is feel good, but it's not to be commodified. And
Yeah.
I think that is one of the great challenges that we have. And for example, in my leadership of a Bible college, I kind of tear up every time I stand in front of our students because um, I just want them to toughen up to life.
Right.
I want them to live their lives well because we've got a culture that says, well, go off and get some therapy. And we've got 1,000 different therapies, and very little actually changes the trajectory of somebody's life. What changes people's lives is commitment and character and a real depth of belief in what you know to be true, and then following that no matter what the cost. And I think that call to discipleship in the truest sense of the word, not just an extra Bible study, not just another fellowship meeting, but serving Jesus no matter what the cost,
Absolutely.
serving Jesus sacrificially. I think that call is perhaps what defines the great need of the Western church right now. Parts of the world, it's not an issue. You give your life to Jesus, and it's literally, you might be giving your life,
Yeah. Absolutely.
to the cause.
Yeah.
I remember when we first started working in Eastern Europe, which was quite a few years ago now. Some of the pastors that we met, the older generation, had spent time in prison for their faith.
Well.
It was not all that long after the fall of the Iron Curtain. And I remember the conversations being so confusing because some of them were saying, we wish we could go back to the communist era. We wish we could go back to the dictators because it was so purifying to the church.
Wow.
And what they were seeing emerging without that element of persecution was not pleasing, was not really edifying. Now, I don't agree with them that you want to go back to that. We pray for those that are in authority over us. But I do understand that the church needs to consistently be seeking to be purified, to become the bride of Christ that the Lord died for.
Right. Well, I mean, history has shown consistently that the church grows under persecution.
Sure.
And I mean, it at some level, I mean, it's sad to say, but it takes away the wishy-washiness of people. You're either all in or you're all out.
Yeah, I'm not the sort of person that throws my hands up in despair at the mutations in our culture. The church has existed in every imaginable kind of culture over 2,000 years.
Right.
Where the church has not succeeded is when it gets into collusion with culture.
Right.
By the 3rd century, the church was in full collusion with the Roman Empire. And then in a desperate attempt sort of recreated itself as the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And it continued that way until there was literally a Protestant Reformation that said we've got to separate out what real faith is. So I am not in despair about our culture. I'm not in despair when things seem to be happening that are so contrary to the values that we hold. And, we get total loons protesting on the streets of our major cities. We hear mayors making the most outlandish comments. Well, that's not going to be good for the citizens. It's not going to be good for the economy. I understand all of that, but it's actually what going to damage the church as we live well for Jesus, because we are more resilient, we have more answers, we are more we have more to give than ever before, and so I have huge confidence in the resilience of the Church of the Lord Jesus, and I'm glad that I can play whatever constructive part I can in making it happen.
Yeah.
And so that's why I remain predominantly apolitical. Have I got political views? Of course I do. Do I understand what I think makes economies work? Yeah, sure. But whether we have politicians or local officials that do what I think is going to work or not doesn't change my absolute confidence that the Lord is the Lord of the church and he's building his church and the gates of hell won't prevail against it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a wonderful place to be because we can stand on the fact that the Bible has withstood the test of time and his promises and what his scripture says is going to continue to do that.
Sure, I mean, churches might have the doors slammed in their face. They might lose their beautiful buildings.
Yeah.
We don't have big Sunday offerings coming in to finance wonderful programs. That's all a possibility, and it's happened throughout history. But not one of those things ultimately damages the true church of the Lord Jesus. He builds his church, and it will exist in whatever circumstances it finds itself.
That's absolutely right. So let's go back in a little bit, just zoom just in on specific leaders here. I want to focus on our leadership gap, specifically talking about Western culture. Where do you believe that our leadership in the Western church is underprepared? Where do you feel like there's a gap between what we're seeing as being fruitful and where we're just kind of needing to brush up on?
I think, again, there are layered answers. I think there are simple ones. I think we have a very poor view of what it means to be prepared for leadership. So we have a, a significant component of leadership in the church that is actually made up of kind of second career individuals.
Yeah.
I don't decry that. I'm grateful for people who put up their hands to do something for Jesus.
Yeah.
But I think at the same time, we've been all too ready to dumb down preparation and not to make high demands on people to rightly divide the word of truth.
Yeah.
And that takes skills. It takes what I say. It takes both orthodoxy and it takes ethos. And so there's got to be some hard work done on what's happened in church history. How was the New Testament constructed? How did we create the canon of Scripture? What is the actual lexical or grammatical structure of the New Testament? How does it hold together? How does it relate to the Old Testament? Um, I think that fundamental biblical theology is really important. And then to develop that into our theological constructs. What do we really believe about Jesus? The first great councils of the church were called because people didn't understand, was Jesus divine? Was Jesus human? Was he human divine? Was he divine human? And we created our creeds and we've kind of lent in on our creeds. But I think that we completely underestimate the need for rigorous discussion, debate, teaching, and learning. And to a large extent in the Western church, we've lost our deep commitment to theological studies and theological learning. So I think that's part of the problem. I think the next one is somewhat related, and that is that we have not been students of culture, and we have, as a result, capitulated to culture. The biggest single temptation of the church over 2,000 years has been to capitulate to culture, to find a way to look acceptable, to gain power, to gain influence, to be able to, dare I say it, stand in the Oval Office and pontificate about how wonderful the Christian faith is. The Christian faith has never been supported by parliaments and governments and kings and princes. It's supported by humble servants of God, doing the work of the kingdom every single day.
Yeah.
And so I think our understanding of culture and, going back to the massive collapse of Christendom following the First World War, 8 kings lost their thrones. All of them were custodians of some form of national church. By the time we get to the 1930s, the church doesn't know whether it's up or down and is hugely discredited, in some instances rightly so. And so classical postmodernity started to take its place. Marxism found a welcome in countries that purportedly were entirely politically opposed to Marxist thought. And I don't think that the Marxist onslaught is diminishing. I think it's growing. And we see that very strongly in the United States right now,
Yes.
a great resurgence of classical Marxism that, in fact, in some ways precedes Marx himself. And I don't think that we've been astute students of that.
Right.
We're against it. We rail against things instead of finding meaningful solutions to help people to develop mindsets, choices, values, characters that are not just church, but they are Christian in the deeper sense of the word. So yeah, I would respond by saying I think our challenge is that we have dumbed down meaningful theological education, and we are paying a big price for it.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, because what happens, because the train's headed this way. What happens if we don't divert and start taking that more seriously, developing the church history, the deeper theological context? What are the consequences we might face if we don't get away from that?
I think we'll face the continued decline of the church, both numerically and in its influence in the West. Um, we like to speak about revival movements. We like to speak about our large churches and successful churches. It's all true. But in real terms, if you look at Europe, or what I often refer to the North Atlantic, which is Europe, the United States, Canada, and then if you want to include in that some of the former colonies like Australia, New Zealand,
Sure.
the reality is that since the 1960s, we've been going backwards numerically in terms of church presence and growth. Our churches are largely empty. I could take you to city after city in Great Britain that had vibrant churches only 120 years ago. And those churches are empty. And then we like to state that it's different in Pentecostal circles. Well, it is to an extent, but I think that the evidence is that much of what's happening in contemporary Pentecostalism in the North Atlantic nations is actually as a direct result of new immigrant populations.
I think that didn't the AG do a study on that about growth and saying we wouldn't have any growth if it wasn't for the immigrant
Well,
population?
I think that's a controversial study, but I think people have done some of that work. And if you took new immigrant populations, so let me speak from a context that I knew well, which is Great Britain. When I went to Bible college in the 1970s, we didn't have a single black pastor. We didn't have a single black majority church, even minority church. We didn't have a single black student. Well, forgive me, we did actually have a couple of students that had come under the influence of missionaries to Burkina Faso. You go to Great Britain today, and in Pentecostal circles, the vast majority of churches are black. And it's interesting now because they are now second generation black churches.
Yeah.
So we have very, very dear friends, pastored a church in East London. We've had a long association. The church, when we started going there, was 100% white people. Then the classical kind of challenge of growth took place, and a black family began to attend. The church rejoiced. Our church is growing. We've got a new family.
Yeah.
And then another family. Well, by the time it reached a certain number, white flight took place. White people left the area. I can take you to that church now. We preach there every year. It's one of our favorite places on the planet. It's 95% black people.
Yeah.
which is wonderful. They found it home. They've brought vibrancy. They've brought life.
Absolutely.
Our immigrants to the United States who come from nations to our south very often have brought a vibrancy to our churches.
Yep.
I think that they will all face challenges if there isn't a commitment to integration,
Yes.
and second generation have issues. But the systemic failure of the things that I've spoken about has resulted really in the decline of the church as we know it, and or as we did know it. And so we have many churches in decline. We have many churches without pastors in our denominational settings.
Right.
And I think it's easy, without being controversial, to say that it represents a certain systemic failure.
Yeah.
We closed our Bible colleges, and we did not continue in the tradition of training people both in orthodoxy and ethos. So I went to Bible college. I learned a certain amount about orthodoxy, but I also went with students to small churches on Sundays. We had lunch in Aunt Susie's house with apple pie afterwards, and we had long conversations about what we observed, what we saw. And before long, we were very loyal members of our denominational identity, and we were passionate Christ followers. We've stripped a lot of that away, and we are facing the consequences.
So basically, what I'm hearing you say is when you were in that Bible college and you were walking in those churches every day, you had a level of formation that was taking place.
Yeah, it was not just education, it was formation.
So why does that matter now?
Well, again, because how do we transmit an ethos? Why do we have an onslaught of Marxist ideology across the United States? I'll tell you why. Because they infiltrated in the 60s and 70s deliberately, consciously, strategically, and gained massive amounts of financial support from left-leaning individuals to totally and absolutely infiltrate the educational system. So if you go back to the 1960s, even the 1970s, in the United States, if you dissected the faculty of a university, for example, in the 60s, it would have been about 52% would have considered themselves politically liberal, and about 48% would have considered themselves politically conservative. Today, it's 98% to 2%.
Wow.
In other words, our universities have become ideological monocultures of fundamental Marxism, Leninist Marxism.
Wow.
So if we don't find a way to redeem our Bible colleges, our institutions of learning, the way in which we instruct people, we face the same kind of consequences. So it's not just getting a degree or education. It's got to be matched with formation. So in my context as a president, it was just not a negotiable that students go on mission trips, that students get into service contexts, that we have chapel 4 days a week. Why? Because education is relatively easy to deliver. Formation is leaning into a preferred future, one step at a time. It's staying true for the long haul, and character development takes much more than instruction.
Right. And I think you started down that road, and I want to hear more about this. Like, what part does specifically Trinity play in this moment in history to say this is why we're different?
Well, I'm biased. I'm the president of Trinity. But I think that I pray, I sincerely hope that we are something of a prophetic voice. When we first came to Ellendale, I thought, Lord, why are you taking us to Ellendale? It's a really small town in a small state in a very cold part of the country.
Yes.
You will well know that many days of the year we will register some of the coldest temperatures on the continent.
Yep.
And here we are, Bible college in this place. It's bizarre. It's crazy to have a Bible college in a small town like this. And yet we have grown. We have continued to see success on multiple fronts. We are in a financially strong place. Well, that's all wonderful, but why? And I think the reason is that there has to be some sustainable model of how we can do better into the future. One of my mentors when we first came to Trinity was a wonderful seminarian by the name of Dr. Bob Cooley. He had been the president of Gordon Conwell. I got to know him and ended up spending every available hour I could with him. And I remember when the Trinity opportunity arose, I spoke it out with him and I said, Bob, I've had this rather strange invite to serve as the president of Trinity. He said, you got to do it. I said, come on, Bob. I said, we'd been leading the largest Pentecostal institution in Europe, right, for some years. And I said, if you were given that opportunity, would you take it? He said, at a heartbeat. And I said, why? And he said, Paul, we need a sustainable model of genuine education and training for Christian ministry into the future in our churches.
Wow.
And he prophesied over me. I really believe it was a prophecy. He said, if you do this faithfully, and interestingly, he said, and the good people of North Dakota get behind you, he said, it won't be long before people beat a pathway to your door to find out how it's done. And I'd like to think that we are now at a place with our levels of accreditation, our graduate program expanding globally, our continued growth in enrollment, which is bucking the trend of Christian higher education. We are losing a Christian college one a week on average in the United States right now.
That's shocking.
And we are bucking that trend. I would like to think that it's all part of that kind of prophetic declaration that Bob Cooley made, that we could show that it can be done. And I'm praying that that'll happen. And as we transition our leadership, I'm praying that the next generation of leadership will catch that flame and that fire, and will continuing training and educating, or educating and training. And it's written into our mission statement. It serves us well. That's what we do at Trinity.
That's really good. It's been a pleasure to see this journey unfold. I mean, I've been at Trinity for the last 12 years, but I mean, it's been incredible to just see the progress of it, and just to see the way it's developing and the leaders that it's churning out. It's been a fun journey to watch. But I have one last question for you, and I want to hear your challenge a little bit of, where do we go next? Like, let's look into the future. When you're looking out and you're seeing all of this, what kind of leaders does the church need in the next 10 to 20 years?
I never give you a simple answer, do I?
No, I don't ask, sir. I should do.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just leaders. I think it's right. I think it's a whole adjustment of theological thought. So I think we are going to face immense cultural pressures. I think that in turn will challenge fundamental ministry models of church.
Sure.
I hope that will produce a form of Christ followership that we desperately need, devoted, dedicated people. And my hope is that circle will be completed by those people saying, we want those who can instruct us in the truth, who can hold us to Christ-honoring culture, and are able to rightly divide the word of truth. I think if that kind of appetite grew in the church, here's my personal hope, is that would then authenticate and validate meaningful training models. And since Aristotle to today, we've never found a better way to transmit knowledge than through the academy. I certainly wouldn't. I had open heart surgery in 2007. I really hoped that my surgeon had not done an online course on a Saturday morning emphasis day in order to do that. My older brother is an engineer. He walked away from a prestigious academic position, very prestigious, because there was political pressure put on him to elevate grades of students. And he said his conscience wouldn't allow him one day to hear about a bridge that had collapsed and that it had been designed by one of his students whose grade he had fabricated. So if doctors understand that, if engineers understand that, why not Christian leaders?
Yeah, absolutely.
We need to understand that. So I hope that that appetite will rise and that there will be two results. Here's my big aspirational dream. Number one, that there would be a demand, a right demand for people to lead our churches who are well trained, understand Christian truth, have good capacities for transmitting truth. And the second one is that they would take responsibility to train them.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't happen without that. So our medical schools are wonderfully underwritten by huge, big pharmaceutical companies. Our engineering schools are. We don't have those kind of companies. We've got to have local churches. And I would love 100% of every local church in the country to support Christian leadership development in some way or another.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. And so, like, let's just pretend like we've pulled a chair up here, and then there's a young leader sitting here in front of them. What is something that you would say to them, that they feel this sense of calling, and they've listened to our conversation, and they see the things on the horizon? What would you say to them right now?
I'd say be earnest. Years go by quickly. Seize the opportunity that you have. Don't lose the joys of your young adulthood, but don't squander these years of learning opportunity. I would say stay in right relationship. Just don't get yourself in a knot over people that disappoint you or let you down. I would certainly say, and I sound very sort of grandfatherly, but I'd say toughen up.
Yeah.
Life is not there just for you to have fun. It's there to be lived, and it's going to throw things at you that you don't expect. Just this week, we lost one of our doctoral students through a bizarre set of circumstances. He was stung by a bee, had an allergic reaction, and 72 hours later died. Key leader, great friend. I was supervising him. That's life. That's the side of heaven. And I think that if I were to summarize all that I've shared with you today, it would be my theology is very simple. Stuff happens. And people who succeed live with a very clear vision of the eternal, that we are this side of heaven, that this journey is going to be over soon. And so maximize every opportunity. And to that young person, take every opportunity, go on every trip, build every relationship you can, enjoy every meal out, seize life, enjoy it, but do so with deep earnestness and a desire to honor Jesus.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Paul, for all your words of wisdom. I appreciate what you're sharing with people today, and thank you for coming on the show today. I really
It's been a
appreciate it.
pleasure. I trust it has good impact.
Yeah, I do too. So I just want to speak to you guys right now. If something about this conversation has just resonated with you, and you just feel this stirring in your heart, just this peace, there's just something about this is just, it's just stirred. This is a moment for you to be able to be called to action. Don't wait. Don't sit around. Continue to sharpen yourself as a leader. Toughen up. Do something hard. Do something that's going to challenge yourself to step outside of your comfort zone. And for those of you, this is also a shameless plug. That might mean stepping into higher education. And if that's you as a young leader and you want to step into a master's or a bachelor's program, please come and see us. We'd be happy to help you on your educational journey. If not, we'll see you next time. And we would love to see you on the next episode of Formation, Faith, and Culture. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.